Okay, guys, the start of this interview will be in English because my next guest, or if I should say the person who I will speak with is the man from England, from Southampton. It's Alex Stewart, CEO of Analytic FC. They're really important at this moment in world of football, especially. The first time maybe you heard about them is when Kevin De Bruyne negotiated with Manchester City 2021, and there are reports that they helped him get a better contract. Of course, to have a better contract and better circumstances, I thanks to sponsors, Plasma, who is our friend and who is back now in the stores. Prisma Kragujevac, please check that. Of course, Free Zone Bazaar if you want to open account, bank account, or you want to open company in the United Emirates, or you want visa. With the code ALESTO10, you can have a 10% discount. Reach them out. And of course, my friends generally who can help you whenever you are traveling abroad or whatever you are doing and you want some secure business, secure life. It could be investment as well. I hope that I didn't forget anyone. So let's move to the interesting part of this this content interview with Alex Stewart. So now I'm speaking with someone who is very influential in world of football, and when I find out about him, the first person that crossed my mind was Brad Pitt from Moneyball. But I think that this his company might be slightly more influential in world of football. I'm speaking with Alex Stewart, CEO of Analytic FC, the company. Alex, should I say the company? Which is involved in world of football, but it seems not only football. Alex, am I overreacting if I say that the life has changed for you when Kevin De Bruyne's lawyers contacted Analytic FC?
Yeah, that was obviously it was very special for us to be able to work with a player of his caliber. So we were privileged to be approached by Kevin and his lawyers when he was negotiating his 2021 contract with Manchester City. And he wanted some analytical support for that. And we were in a position to provide some pretty detailed analytics for him. And I think he was happy with the result.
Yeah, the word is that he got 30% salary better than before. Is that true?
The exact details of the deal are obviously privileged to them, but I think it's fair to say that we were able to explain his value to Manchester City, both in terms of his footballing ability and the financial impact of that, in a way that made quite a compelling case for him.
Yeah, when ESPN with Sam Teague did the interview, they showed that photo. How much is he contributing to the goals, and that he was far the best in that terms. Just one brief question about him. Do you think that he's the biggest success story so far for Analytic FC?
I think he's certainly a big success for us. It's interesting. We work in a lot of different areas. So the player contract negotiation stuff is only one of the things we do. But it is something that definitely attracts the most media attention, in part because some of the other work we do is confidential and we can't discuss our clients, but also because people love stories about footballers. And they love to hear footballers doing interesting things. The use of data is innovative and interesting. But also I think more fans are interested in data now, and they have an understanding of what's being talked about. So I think certainly from a marketing perspective, that was a big success for us. We have done that work as well in women's football, and I think it's really important because for us, we're able to support women's footballers when they're negotiating their contracts. And obviously, that is a space where maybe the financial side of the game is not caught up with the growth. And so being able to support them and make a clear case for why they should be fairly paid for what they do is also very important.
Yeah, I read about Alex Greenwood and your help to her, and really respect for what have you done. But imagine that you are speaking now with, I don't know, your grandmother or someone elderly, and how would you explain what do you do for players or for clubs?
Yeah, of course. So what we do is we take data about football and turn it into insights. So if you have a question about football, then we can use data to answer it. That might be, how do I find a really good player? It might be, how much should this player be paid? It might be who our next head coach should be. It might be, I want to buy a football club and I don't know where to look for one. So any kind of question where we can apply data analytics to finding a sensible, intelligent answer for that, we help clubs reduce their risk around decision making, maximize their financial impact, all that kind of stuff. But it really starts around the event data in games. You know, when players are kicking the ball around, that can be counted, and then we can extract stuff from that to help clubs make good decisions.
But Alex, that means that you need a lot of data. How do you collect them?
Yeah, so we work with third-party data providers, which is very common in the consultancy space. The collection of match data is a very time-consuming and expensive process. Generally quite an automated process now. So there'll be cameras set up all around a ground. They'll be recording. That stuff will then get fed through, often now, an AI process, which will record the events, ensure that they're correctly tagged to the right player, and so on. That data then comes through to us in the form of an API, and we can start to work with that raw data. There are a number of different companies that collect it, but basically every company that's like us wouldn't collect it. We would work with a data provider.
Excuse me for my next question, but do you use detectives?
Detectives?
Yes.
In what way?
Because, you know, maybe to find out about salary, about, I don't know.
Oh, no. So salary is a good one. So there are companies, the one that we work with is called Superlige. There are a couple of others that will provide salary information, and they do so on the basis of contacts and also talking to people in the media and so on. It's a really good example of the difference between data at the elite end of football and at the lower. So if you're talking about players in, I mean, there are a couple of leagues that actually publish this information, Serie A, MLS, for example. But if you're looking at a Premier League player, you can be relatively confident that that's a good, accurate value for the salary. If you're looking at a player in Serie C, maybe in Italy or the third division of France or something, it's a little bit harder to come by really accurate information. So, you know, we sometimes make a best guess, but that's what everybody would do in that situation. We don't hire detectives to follow people around and try and work out how much money they have to spend on watches.
Yeah, I understand. Tell me, when you watch the Moneyball with Brad Pitt, was that some kind of inspiration, or was that maybe part of the process that you are on the right path?
Yeah, genuinely. So I got into this world originally through content creation. So I worked with some guys to set up a YouTube channel called Tifo Football, which explained tactics, how teams play, but also some recruitment stuff. Prior to doing that, I was reading a lot about football. I was watching a lot about football, and Moneyball was certainly one of the things that I, in the first instance, read. And there were a couple of other books, Soccernomics, The Numbers Game, stuff that Jonathan Wilson's written about tactics, where I thought, this is a really interesting way to think about football. And I think one of the things that's great about working with data is it doesn't just provide answers, But if you're working with data, it changes the way you ask questions. And that's what Moneyball did so profoundly, I think, was it made people realize that there was a new way of thinking about sport, and that it could be answered using data, using analytics, using methods that were not the conventional old-fashioned approach. There is still definite value in that. Like, I would never assess the quality of a player purely on data. I would always want to watch video. I would have other questions. Maybe I would hire some detectives. But I think Moneyball was a really kind of pivotal moment for people to see, actually, there's real value here. And if we can prove that it works in this team and this setting, maybe we can exploit this idea, these concepts in different sports for different teams.
Partially, you answered my next question. Do coaches still go by their gut feeling? Or
oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And with player recruitment and coaching in general, the chemistry of a team is incredibly important. You can have very successful players, or very technically capable players who don't necessarily reach the levels that their playing ability might suggest because of team chemistry, because of personal issues. Coaches will get a feel for a dressing room and how they can run it. And obviously, like, these things change over time. You know, there's a younger generation of footballers now who have different expectations. They have perhaps different backgrounds, and managing that process is really interesting, I think, for head coaches. Also, you know, you can't just go off gut feeling or numbers. Like, every smart team is gathering as much information as they can from all the different available sources, including companies like ourselves. And then they're making an assessment based on how valuable they think those different bits are, and being aware of your bias. So, for example, you know, if I'm a bit old school, I might go more with my gut. And so I have to listen to the data. I have to be aware that maybe I'm biased towards getting on with somebody rather than looking at their XG numbers. Like, these are all things, again, that data can help you change the way you think about these things as much as it can provide answers in itself.
So, speaking about it, can you give an example where your analytics completely changed a club's opinion about the player, either positively or negatively?
Well, fortunately, it's usually positive. I think what can be really interesting is when you start. So when we work with players on contract stuff, the simplest element is an assessment of that player's ability. Because by and large, for a start, we have been lucky enough to largely work with elite level players. So, you know, if you go into a negotiation and you're Kevin De Bruyne, like, you know, you're basically the best central midfielder in the world. And you don't need to hire a smart analytics company like us to tell you that. And you don't have to hire us to tell Manchester City that either. What is useful, though, is to quantify that ability relative to other players, and crucially then add a financial value to it. So, for example, if we're thinking about De Bruyne, one of the things you might say is, if we were to replace De Bruyne, A, how easy is it to find another De Bruyne? Not very easy, but there are some very good footballers out there. But also, how much would it cost? What would the transfer fee be? What would the wages be? What would the signing bonus be? Agent fees. So straight away, you've got keeping him and paying him more versus the cost of replacing him and that player not being as good, not working out as well. Going back to your original point about chemistry, De Bruyne is a guy who's in that dressing room. He's there for a while. He's respected. How do you replace that? All of that stuff. Then what we can also start to do is layer additional financial information on top of that. So, for example, if we have a team with De Bruyne and without him, what is the different probability of where that team finishes? And based on that, can we say, effectively, if you have De Bruyne in your team, you're 10% more likely to win the Champions League, and therefore 10% more likely to gain tens of millions of pounds from doing so. So I think sometimes what we do is not necessarily change the perception of a player as a player, but change the club's understanding of that value of the player to them. So when we worked with Ben White, for example, Ben White, fantastic fullback, a lot of positional versatility, can play as a centre-back as well, also arguably could play as a defensive midfielder. But one of the real things that we were able to highlight there was his basically his persistence. He's always in the team. He's almost never injured. And so you can start to say, you know, again, you're not just getting a player who's really good in their position, but you're getting one who's consistently available. And to replace that player, in real terms, you're probably looking at two players. And actually, if you include the fact that he can cover centre-back, you're almost looking at three players. So now you're starting to build an idea of how that player fits into a squad, not just that player as a standalone individual. And I think that's really important because it allows clubs to start to think about footballers in a different kind of way and change their perception.
Yeah, I just received the message from Nemanja Matic, so he's still playing, you know, even that he is in advanced part of his career. But speaking about him and about the region, because most of my viewers and followers are from the region, Serbia, of course, Montenegro, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, North Macedonia, Slovenia. Have you ever done analysis or projects for the clubs from this part of Europe?
We haven't specifically worked with clubs in that region, no. And it's really interesting because to flip it round, we have worked with clubs in other regions, particularly on coaching projects, where coaches from the Balkans will crop up. Very, very highly rated coaches in many instances. And so it's an area that we look more at, to this point, we've looked more at in terms of its potential to solve problems for us, rather than clubs in that region coming to us and asking us to solve problems. Obviously, the region has an incredible reputation for developing talent as well. And I think, again, you know, we have all of those leagues available on our scouting platform, for example. So going through and finding players from there is quite a fun thing to do, have a look around. And many of those players have obviously translated into successes for teams that have scouted them across the rest of Europe and globally. And some of those teams will be using Analytics FC scouting software. So indirectly, we're kind of, we've touched the region, but we've not worked specifically with a club there. I would love to, because I think it's got a really rich and interesting football culture, and it would be a real privilege to work with clubs over there.
Would you think it's maybe expensive for them, or do you think that they rely more on the, let's say, old stuff?
It's hard to know exactly, because even within a football market like England, for example, you have a huge disparity between wealthier teams and less wealthy teams, teams who love using data and want to integrate it everywhere, teams who don't. There are teams who are rich enough to buy access to data platforms but don't use them very well. And there are teams that have almost no money, but use data very, very effectively. I think one of the things that I would say to clubs who are thinking about the cost of using services like ours is that, yes, of course, there is an expenditure in doing so. You have to buy a subscription to the software or whatever it is, but it's going to save you money in the long term. And it's going to save you, for sure, more money than you're spending, because it will allow your decisions to be more informed. It will allow your risk to be minimized. You'll be able to pick up players that you can sell for higher transfer fees because they're a better quality of player. So yeah, it's like anything, you know, you invest initially, but the dividends that are paid out down the line should more than compensate for that.
I ask you before our conversation, maybe to look up about some clubs in the region. Have you maybe had a chance to look, and what do you think? What clubs, especially from my beautiful country, would benefit the most, like Red Star or Partizan Belgrade? Or do you think sorry for a long question, do you think that you can help them putting players, allocating players to some markets?
I think every club could benefit from a conversation around data. Obviously, it's very difficult to know exactly how to answer that question without knowing specifically what those clubs are doing. And it may be that actually, you know, there's some pretty good data analytics in those clubs in some instances. It would surprise me if the clubs that were regularly competing in Europe didn't have some form of data analytics going. One of the funny, and it's not an issue, but a lot of these platforms are actually provided in English, French, or Dutch. And so it's quite tricky sometimes if you're in a country where, you know, your alphabet is different in some instances, and, you know, trying to so we've got Transfer Lab, our scouting platform. We have versions in different languages, but not yet in any Balkan languages. But so that can be a straightforward, immediate barrier. You might have to work with a local company and try and get them to develop a front end for you. But I think there's two different things at play. So there's data analytics and the quality of the analytics, the quality of the platform, the quality if you're building yourself of your data engineers, your data sources, and so on. But then on the other side, there's the process. There's the conversations that happen within a club. There's a streamlined idea of scouts getting their assignments, doing their data work, feeding into a sporting director, the sporting director having a good relationship with the owner. Like a club, you can't just give a club all the tools if they don't know what they're going to do with them. And I think that's what makes it difficult, because you can have some clubs that actually have really good internal processes. And you're like, yeah, okay, you know, you would benefit a bit from data, but you guys are actually thinking about this in a very sensible and intelligent way. So it would be an addition to it. Other clubs, you look at them and they've got all the toys, but they're sat there, this guy's arguing with that guy, this part of the club never talks to that part of the club. And so it doesn't really matter how much money they're spending because it's not producing any benefit for them.
Was there ever a player whose data you spotted at Analytics FC before he became famous, and you said this guy is going to be really, really be good?
I think it's difficult, and I'm going to give you a really boring data analyst answer for this, is that players are good at different levels. And so the idea of I mean, don't get me wrong, Erling Haaland, great player, right? No one's arguing with that. Kevin De Bruyne, great player. No one's arguing with that. But I think in some instances, the really interesting players are the ones that you find who maybe are never going to be a Ballon d'Or winner, but at the level that they're at, they can jump up so much more, and people haven't necessarily heard of them. I'll give you two examples from your region. So I'm going to say the name wrong, which is terrible, but a central midfielder for Partizan called Sasha Zdelar.
Sasha Zdelar, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So he was a player who, when I was back at Tifo, I absolutely loved him. I used to put him in our videos. I was like, this guy is a fantastic all-round central midfielder. He's got the passing, he's got the defensive attitude, he can create, he can keep the ball safely. I know he had a spell at Olympiacos, but so he was someone where I was willing a club to take him, because I thought if he just got an opportunity somewhere else, maybe he could shine in a certain way. There are, you know, players that will go to particularly somewhere like France or maybe the second Bundesliga who really kick on at that point. Speaking of the second Bundesliga, I also really liked Borna Sosa when he was at Stuttgart in the Zweite Bundesliga. And I put him in a couple of videos. I was like, this guy is going to be really, really good. I think he was 19 maybe at that point. And then 2 seasons later, he was the leading assist provider in the Bundesliga. So, you know, I think there are some fantastic players in that region. Sometimes they don't necessarily translate their talents outside the area. But also, you know, if they are happy and have had a good career, then that's all good as well.
I understand. Can a player's mentality, his drive, teamwork, attitude be identified through data, or are these still the invisible dimensions of football?
So, largely invisible, yes. I think at the sharp end, there will be clubs that are doing more. In England, we call it psychosocial, so psychological social stuff around psychometric testing, player chemistry with other players. Those kinds of things can be assessed to a degree. I think that you can get a lot from video on that. So if you're watching a player, I have a particular interest in goalkeepers, and you can see how goalkeepers react after they've conceded. Mm-hmm. Some, the head goes down, others they're shouting, others are getting themselves back in the zone, you know, playing with their gloves, head down, but you can see the focus, the intensity. It's not necessarily that one of those is better than the others, but you want to be looking to see what the reaction is and how they go about responding to that happening. I do feel like there are ways of recording information that can be really helpful, though. So we did a project with a club in London where they assessed the, I guess for want of a better word, character of their team. So they spoke to the coaches, they spoke to the medical staff, and they basically got them to assess the players on whether they were role models, down to players who were quite difficult to work with. And then they were able to assess that versus the players' output in sporting terms. So we used our algorithm, the GDA algorithm. But if you look at those, you can then see the players who are incredibly strong characters, like leaders in the dressing room, but maybe aren't actually that good on the pitch now. And then there will always be some players who are fantastic footballers and quite difficult to work with. So you then have a data set that allows you to start to make decisions about, actually, is that player too much trouble? We should just get rid of them. What about if we put this role model with this player who's very difficult and one mentors the other? Does that then change that player's work ethic, his mentality, his character, and it's beneficial to the team? So maybe you decide to keep a player around who's not doing very much on the pitch, but brings so much else with them. Sometimes, you know, international teams will use the 22nd, 23rd player slots at World Cups to bring someone like that, who is a model professional, great character, probably won't play, but does something for the dressing room that is extremely important. That area, I think, is where, to go back to a question you asked earlier, that's where the gut comes in to a degree as well. You know, and people who work in football, they are experienced, they understand what you need in a dressing room to get that balance right. And you can have teams with loads and loads of talented players, but if that balance isn't correct, they're not going to win anything. Likewise, you can have teams where the average level of the player is really not that great, but if they're all extremely hardworking, disciplined, model professionals, you can achieve a lot with that. So again, it's about thinking, what is it that I'm looking for? How do I measure that? And then how do I turn that into decision making, which is good for the team?
Do you think that in the future there will be AI coach, artificial intelligence coach, based on data?
I think that there will probably be, whether you want to call it a coach, I don't know, but I think there will definitely be systems that allow AI to review footage of training sessions, for example, or matches, and make suggestions on things that should be addressed. I'm sure that will happen. Yeah.
Maybe even during the game, do you think?
I think possibly during the game. I mean, I know, like, there are coaches. I think Brentford have a tactical coach who's on the pitch side when the game is on and will make observations. Again, it's difficult because, you know, what is AI? Ultimately, AI just ingests huge data sets and makes suggestions based on what has happened more than anything else. And so, yes, if you fed in millions of matches, then you could say, okay, well, if this is happening and the ball's here and these players are there, and, you know, maybe this is the most likely outcome. But I also feel like you can't beat the human sense of where a game is at. You know, if you go and watch a game, a team might be 1-0 up, but you can feel that it's going to change. The crowd is starting to react a certain way. The players are carrying with more confidence. Maybe they're shooting a little bit more. Like, there is stuff there that AI is just never going to be able to measure. And so I don't think you're ever going to get to a situation where AI replaces anybody in football. I don't think it'll replace scouts. But what I do think is that it can provide useful tools where assessing large amounts of information quickly is a necessary and helpful thing.
Which club has surprised you the most with analytics seriousness?
Ooh, good question. I think okay. There's a club in Poland, and it's called Motor Lublin, and it's not a historically hugely successful club. But they are, I don't think they'd mind me saying it, they are obsessed with analytics, and their coaching models, their player assessment, everything runs on probability, data analytics. There's a brilliant guy there called Gert Remmel, who's a genius coach, who also worked with the Finnish under-21s. And everything he does in his coaching is driven by analytics and probability. And they are looking constantly for ways to innovate around how you use data, how you can make better decisions, how that can be in coaching, but also in terms of player recruitment, in terms of sports science. And I think it's really cool to have conversations with the guys there like Rasmus, because they're not, like I say, they're not from a club that has huge amounts of money or is a traditional powerhouse, or, you know, you'd necessarily think these guys are doing really cutting edge stuff. And it's cutting edge stuff with how they're thinking about it. They're developing the tools as well, and we're helping them with that. But it's more the attitude to it. It's more the way that they're constantly looking for new ways to solve problems. So yeah, they're fantastic.
If you had to work for one club, which one would it be, and why, apart from Southampton?
Apart from Southampton. I know we touched on it briefly at the beginning. I think working in women's football is really interesting at the moment. And I think the reason for that is that as far as the use of data and analytics are concerned, women's football is behind men's football. And the main reason for that is actually a lack of money. That people aren't investing in women's football enough yet to create some kind of equality there. It will happen. Like, you know, women's football is taking off in terms of sponsorship, in terms of crowds. All of that stuff will go up and up. And the use of data will improve the product, because you'll get better players and you'll be able to look after them better. And you know, it then makes for a more engaging spectacle. But I feel like if you were working at a club, you know, maybe a lower WSL club or even a second division team in England, and you really use data well in terms of recruitment and in terms of coach recruitment and stuff, you could have a real impact, probably more quickly than you could have an impact in men's football. And I think that would be really interesting.
What is the most overrated and the most underrated football metric today?
So the most overrated is single game XG.
Oh, so, really? I heard that. Yeah.
So XG is great.
Expected goals, right?
Expected goals. So basically, expected goals is a number for what you intuitively know, which is that some chances are better than others. If I take a shot from the 6-yard box, I'm more likely to score than from the edge of the penalty area. And all XG does is it turns that into a number. If you look at a striker, or even a team, XG for, XG against, across at least 8 or 9 games, ideally maybe 10 or 15, then you get a really good sense of what those teams or what that striker is doing. But when you see it flashed up on the corner of the screen after a game, and it's like Arsenal 2.1 XG, Man City 0.4 XG, like, so what? It's on its own. All it means is that one team had better chances during the course of a game. Well, given how few chances there are in football, and given how much luck can play a part in whether that chance becomes a goal or not, it's pretty meaningless to look at a single game stat. From an underrated perspective, I think that's really, really hard. I'm really interested in transitional football, so I would probably pick metrics around how well teams transition. We have some in our platform around how good the first transitional pass is and how secure that pass is for when teams win the ball back and then go for it. That's the kind of football I like to watch. So probably something around that, because transition stuff is becoming more and more important in football, but I think teams are still maybe wrestling with how to measure that effectively.
Do you work in other sports, or maybe economics, or maybe market, or I don't know, crypto? Can you work in those parts of industry, life, or whatever?
So I did work in rugby for a little while, rugby union. I had the privilege of working in the 2015 World Cup, doing data-related content creation for them. I think, I will read about analytics in other sports, basketball, ice hockey, NFL, cricket, rugby union, and I find it really interesting. But I don't know the way of thinking. Yes, I could translate how to think about those things, but it would take me a while to get up to speed on how best to apply the analytics to those sports. So it's not something that I could just go and start doing tomorrow. I would have to learn some stuff. In terms of markets and crypto and that kind of thing, I don't do any of that. Maybe I could. I don't know. I wouldn't like to presume.
I suppose that among yourself in your company, you speak about football players, and what is general opinion, and what is your opinion? Who do you think is the most underrated football player in the world right now? Can you name someone?
I think it's difficult to pick out individual players, because I guess, again, this is the sort of horribly boring answer you get when you ask analytics people a question like that. What do we mean by underrated? Do we mean that, we could buy them for less money than they might be worth? Do we mean that most people don't bring their name up when talking about the great footballers? I think for me, the player I've really enjoyed becoming a player that people do talk about is Elliot Anderson for England. Newcastle sold him for reasons to do a PSR largely. And then he goes into a team that plays quite counter-attacking football. And then all of a sudden, in the last kind of 2-3 games under Thomas Tuchel, people have had to look at him as really a complete all-round midfielder. And to me, now, he's as important as Rice in that midfield balance. Now, if you said 6 months ago, Elliot Anderson is going to be the second name on a team sheet or third name on a team sheet for England, you'd be like, what are you talking about? That's ridiculous. So watching that happen, I think, is always fun. And I would say that doesn't have to be a data thing. Data can help you identify players and so on, but sometimes there is just a pleasure in sitting down and watching a game and going, oh, you're really good. I don't know who you are. Because this is a thing as well, right? People who work in football, no, that's not fair. People who talk about football on the internet will very often make out that they know every single player who has ever pulled on a jersey, right? And it's almost like a personal slight to go, I haven't heard of that person. But I watch games where I haven't heard of players like quite regularly. There'll be someone who crops up, and these are sometimes big teams, right? Because it is impossible to know everything. It is impossible to keep up with the football in one country, let alone 5 countries, let alone 40 countries. So it's nice that you can still watch games and be surprised and go, oh, that's cool. I was watching Vålerenga against Wolfsburg in the Women's Champions League a couple of days ago. I think it was Wednesday night. And there were a couple of players in there who I'd never come across before, and they were really good. They were really fun to watch. And I think that's one of the nice things. You can't, even if you work in analytics, it doesn't mean that you can't be surprised anymore and can't enjoy a piece of skill or a good tackle or a ridiculous shot. You know, football is still good fun anyway.
If you could give a pay rise to one Serbian player, based purely on your data, who would it be, and which player from Serbia do you think should reach out to you and ask for advice? And to say Djelar is at the later stage of his career, so you must pick someone else if you can.
Yeah. So I think it's very difficult to answer your first question around underpaid, because I mean, those questions are so contextual to their clubs and so on. So what I did for this one instead was I actually went on our platform and I picked out 2 young players who I think are going to be really good. And then, yeah, maybe they can come and talk to us when they're planning their next move. So the first one I found was a guy called Andrej Kostic, who's at Partizan at the moment. Hasn't played a huge amount so far this season, but his striker numbers, and I know Serbia has a crazy good record with producing centre forwards. This guy is the next guy off the line, in my opinion. His XG numbers are superb. His ability to pick up the ball in good positions, very, very strong. I'd like to see a little more in terms of his passing ability. I think maybe he can be a little bit more creative, but in terms of like pure center forward stuff, this guy could be very, very strong. The other one who I really, really like is a right back at Radniki called Petrovic. Jordi Petrovic, I think is how you'd say it. Only 17, but he's already played like 350 minutes for Radniki. He could be exceptional as a right back. He's already, if you rank him by what other right backs in the Superliga are doing, he's in the top 1% for the quality of his crosses, the top 3% for his key passes, the top 1% for passes into the box, and the top 1% for touches in the final third. So that is an exceptional profile for a player of his age. So if he maintains that trajectory, he could be a superstar possibly.
I know Andrej Kostic agents, and I will provide the contact, you know.
Yes. Excellent. Tell him to get in.
About Petrovic, I will try to find out, and I think that from both parts they will watch this interview, and I will push them to contact you, because I think it can benefit all the sides. However, thanks very much for your time, Alex. If you have something to tell the audience which might be interesting also, which you can share, please feel free to do it. And I really think that statistics is important to maybe to channel you or to guide you, not to make definite decisions, but you know, it's better you to know more than to know less, right?
Exactly. Honestly, if you could sum up the use of data analytics in anything, it's that. It is always better to know more. And then if you have a process that allows you to use that information, it's going to be a benefit. Will it replace human beings and gut instinct and emotion? No, of course it won't. But it can help everybody make better decisions. I guess I would just say, firstly, thank you. Thank you for so many interesting questions. If people would like to know more about us as a company, the website is analyticsfc.co.uk. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I put updates about the company on there sometimes, write little articles. I might do, 5 Serbian teenagers that you should definitely be paying attention to. So yeah, and people are always welcome to reach out and get in touch if they have questions about stuff. Just drop me a DM on LinkedIn and I'm always happy to answer.
I will help you as much as I can. Of course, Alex, this is more like a personal question. Please, if there is a chance to help Serbian national team, I would highly appreciate that for your help. And if
they are currently in England's qualification group for the World Cup. So I think maybe I wait a couple of months before I do that. But yes, I saw you had not a great result against Albania. So yes,
definitely
tricky times. But we remember Dusan Tadic fondly. At Southampton and obviously you guys as well. So
yeah, he is a great guy, great football player, and great character from both part of the story you mentioned, as someone who provides statistically and who is a leader in the locker room. That's
absolutely right. Yeah, that was our experience at Southampton. He's very fondly remembered there.
Alex, thanks a lot for your time once again. Good luck with Analytics FC. Really appreciate whatever you've done. I was following Tifo football at the start. Great things you were doing with limited resources, with some animation, what you explained and everything. And keep on going forward. The knowledge is the power, right?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you, Alex. In touch about everything. So, guys, thanks for watching. It was an interview with Alex Stewart, who gave us insight in world of metrics in football, which might help. Of course, thanks to Plasma, one of our main sponsors, Prisma Kragujevac. Check their products, especially the products which might help you have a healthy life. Of course, thanks to Generali Insurance and my friends over there. Now we are approaching festive periods. Maybe you will travel and you can reach out to them. And of course, Free Zone Bazaar, which might help you to open account, to get visa, or maybe to open the company in United Emirates. With the code ALESTO10, you have a 10% discount to all of their services. So we're approaching interesting part of the year, and I wish you all the best and stay in touch, and we speak soon. Bye.